Now this car is the very car Chris Harris had as his long-term test cars. And this car's got a little secret under its bonnet I'll share with you later. I really don't think now there's an awful lot on the road that could be faster than this car. Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now I've always been a big fan of the Audi RS3 and the new version with its very clever torque splitter. It's pretty much the perfect car for me. It's fast, it's practical, it's economical, and now it's agile. And with that rally car aping turboed 5-cylinder engine under the bonnet, it oozes charisma. But earlier this year, BMW launched a new version of the M2, which is basically a chopped down and detuned M4 with all the classic M3 ingredients: 2 doors, rear wheel drive, and a potent straight 6 engine under that long bonnet. And if you equalize the spec between these two cars, they're pretty much the same price. You could even have a manual gearbox. So if ever there was a car to draw me away from the Volkswagen Group, it is the new M2. So in today's video, we're going to see if the M2 really is an RS3 beater, starting with how it performs on paper. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys how you can support the channel. The easiest and most important way to do that is simply to subscribe, because every subscription means an awful lot right now. I'd also like to say big thanks to BMW UK for the loan of the M2, and also big thanks to APS Specialist Vehicles here in Brackley, Northamptonshire, for the loan of the RS3 and the brilliant filming location. They've got some amazing cars in stock here, like a very tidy Mark IV Golf R32 in reflex silver, this 2021 RS4 carbon black edition. This is my favourite actually, this Isaac blue, very late, like a 2020 model year, Mark 7.5 GTI performance with DCC and 19-inch pressure wheels. That's a really nice package. Down here we've got a pre-OPF Audi RS3 Sportback in the beautiful Daytona grey, and a very stunning Nogaro edition B8 RS4 Avant, one of 40 in the UK. APS are also looking for apprentices to work in their workshops right now. So if you want to start in the motor trade, there is no better place to do that than here at APS. Okay, so how do these cars compare on paper? Well, there are some very interesting numbers here, starting with the price. I'm using the stats for an RS3 Saloon. This is a Sportback, but I feel the Saloon is a closer match to the M2. Plus, I'm using the stats for a Carbon Black edition because, again, I feel that's a better match for the carbon-laden M2 than the base RS3 or the Vorsprung. So, base price of an RS3 Saloon Carbon Black is £61,550. This car's got the £5,000 dynamic pack, which gives you carbon ceramic brakes and the adaptive dampers, and also the speed limit raised to 180 miles an hour. It's also Daytona grey, which is £575. That makes £67,125 on the road. The M2 base price, and it does come with a lot of standard kit, is £65,830. This car's got a couple of options I wouldn't really recommend. It's got the manual gearbox for 1,200 quid, and it's got the £9,095 M Racetrack package, which gives you mainly the bucket seats, a speed limit raise, and a driving course to learn how to drive your car properly. I wouldn't recommend that. You're paying £9 really to just upgrade some really good standard seats, so I'd stick with those. And all I'd order is a comfort pack for £730. If you do that, that's still cheaper than this RS3 as spec'd. Drivetrain wise, well, we've got a 2.5 straight 5 turbo engine with the RS3, Magna all-wheel drive with Audi torque rear torque vectoring. With the M2, we've got a 3-litre straight 6 twin turbo rear wheel drive active M differential, and there's no X-Drive option with the M2. For that, you have to have the M3 or the M4. Gearbox is a 7-speed twin clutch DQ 500, and with the M2, it's a 6-speed manual or an 8-speed Steptronic ZF torque converter automatic. Power and torque, well, this is interesting. So 400 horsepower, 500 newton meters the torque for the RS3, 460 horsepower, 550 newton meters the torque for the M2. You would think that would be an easy win for the M2 then, but this is quite a bit heavier. If you look at the power to weight ratio, there's not a lot in it. 253 horsepower per tonne versus 255. And when it comes to torque, well, actually, it's a win for the RS3. 317 newton meters per tonne, 305 newton meters per tonne. And this car's got a little secret under its bonnet I'll share with you later. 0 to 62 time, well, it's another win for the RS3, 3.8 seconds versus 4.3 for the manual, 4.1 for the auto. That's just because it's all-wheel drive though. Top speed, they're both limited to 155 as standard, but both can be raised to 180 if you pay a little bit more. MPG, well, the RS3 is a little bit more economical, 31.7 on the combined cycle versus 29. CO2 emissions reflect that, so we've got 203 grams per kilometre for the RS3 and 219 for the M2. Fuel tank capacity, probably not top of a lot of people's priorities, but if you do long distance touring, it does matter. RS3's got a 55 litre tank. The much bigger M2 that uses a bit more fuel has got a smaller tank at 52 litres. Size-wise, this is quite interesting. So they're pretty similar in length, 4.54 metres versus 4.58. The width is quite different though. This is 1.98, the RS3 versus 2.07. So 9 centimetres wider. Doesn't sound like a lot, but could mean the difference between your mirror staying on your car and not, or fitting in your garage. Height-wise, there's not a lot in it, 1.41 metres versus 1.40. Wheelbase, 2.63 versus 2.75. So even though this is a chopped down M4, it's still got a longer wheelbase than the RS3. Weight, very interesting, 1575 kilograms for the RS3, 1800 kilograms for the M2. You can see why, even though it's got a power and torque deficit, it's still going to be quicker or very close in real world driving conditions. Right, now let's have a look at the outside of these two. Yeah, very exciting cars. Okay, let's start off then with the RS3. So this is the carbon black edition, which sits in the middle of the range above the base model, below the Vorsprung. Apologies for the dirt, by the way. It was minus something this morning and it would have been impossible to clean the car and make the video today. But if you're like me and Joe Achilles, you'll actually prefer an Audi RS covered in muck because it just reminds you how usable it is all year round. Now it's called carbon black because it's got some carbon on it. So this bit on the spoiler is really nice. Down here under the muck, we have some carbon on the sill. We've got carbon mirror casings as well. This car's in Daytona grey, so a cost option, but it's the colour that flatters Audis the most. It really brings out the curves, even with the muck on this car. We've got LED matrix headlights that do the checkered flag pattern down here on startup. We've obviously got a massive grille in gloss black with a gloss black frame, and then we've got these 19-inch wheels. So we've got wider wheels at the front to counter any understeer, 265, 30, 19, and we've also got ceramic brakes as well, which were part of that dynamic pack, a very rare option. At the back we've got 245, 35, 19, so a little bit narrower. That's still a lot of rubber on the road. Bearing in mind this car's four-wheel drive as well. You can imagine it's pretty hard to unstick it, whatever the weather. Okay, this car's got the matte aluminium roof rails as well. Quite a rare option that, and I think it looks quite cool. At the back then we've got some honeycomb inlays. We've got a bit of a diffuser and we've got two oval exhaust tips. Now they're not connected to the exhaust pipes, but that's always been the way with Audi RS, including R8s, probably because it would end up melting the bumper. So inside there we have the real exhaust. So I think that's just about okay. Got black badges on this car and then black around the windows, which you don't get on the base RS3. Okay, now onto the M2. Now, is it just me? But I think the M2 looks far more imposing than the RS3. The RS3 is meant to be a muscular car, but compared to the M2, wheel arches, it looks pretty slab-sided. Admittedly, the dirt doesn't help. But yeah, it looks bigger. Well, it's not really. It's pretty much the same size as an RS3 saloon. It's just a little bit wider. It looks more expensive. Well, again, that's debatable. Okay, the design isn't all good. The front and rear bumpers are a little bit clumsy, but I think in black it hides a lot of that. And maybe that's why BMW chose to spec this car in black, because it's very rare for a press car. Spec-wise, there's only one trim level and it gives you pretty much everything. This car's in sapphire black. It's got LED matrix headlights. It's got the carbon roof, that's standard. It's got the M mirrors. It's got 20-inch wheels at the back, 19s at the front. They're actually 10.5 inches wide, 285, 30, 20 Pilot Sport 4Ss. We have got 275, 35, 19s at the front on 9.5-inch wheels. This car's got the track pack and should come with track tyres, but luckily BMW UK have fitted Pilot Sport 4Ss because the weather's been pretty shocking while I have had it. If it's not been raining, it's been freezing. Let's have a quick look at the brakes. So there's no carbon ceramic option, but you do get some serious steel brakes as standard. You can see 2Ps cross-drilled, massive calipers, which I think a 6-piston and red is a no-cost option. The ride height is interesting. Now, it does look a little bit high, but I thought it could be me, so I compared the height with my Golf GTD estate, and I can get 3 fingers in the M2 wheel arch gap easily. I can't do that in my GTD estate. So the M2 sits higher than a diesel Golf estate. How about that? So there's a lot of room for competition and CS models to fix that. Let's just have a quick look at the back. So again, the blocky styling continues. We've got a red reflector there to emphasize the blockiness. Massive exhaust, which I'm pretty sure are completely genuine. A little bit of a diffuser. And quite a small spoiler. But overall, I like it. I like it a lot. I don't normally like black cars, but I think to tone down the blockiness at the front and back, you do need that. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. What do you prefer? Which one of these two do you prefer the look of more? Is it the M2 or is it the RS3? Now, let's have a look at the inside where it gets even harder for the RS3. Okay, let's see what a £65,000 Audi RS looks like in 2023. Now, I've been a pretty vocal critic of the interior quality of this generation of A3 since it was launched 3 years ago. It's not really good enough for an 30k S-Line. So in a 65k RS, to have this quality of plastic is very, very disappointing. So we've got pretty nasty plastic all the way up to this level. It gets a bit better here. There's some Alcantara there, that is padded. The window switches are actually better than the BMW ones. They've got a chrome tip on them. The carpet's not much cop either. It's that sort of sprayed on fabric that's same as a Golf, or even not far off that of an Up. And this is an Audi RS3. Stainless pedals. The seats are comfortable, but they're pretty boring, really. They look like those in an S3 and possibly an S-Line as well. Part of the problem with the RS3 is that the material quality is poor. I mean, look at the plastic on that centre console. But we can't dress it up with options that are available in other markets. They can have coloured seats, they can have coloured inlays. On the old model, you could have a slab of Alcantara that covered up the side of the centre console, but you didn't really need to because the plastic quality was great. On this, it's pretty nasty. So let's hope it all gets fixed with the facelift. I'm sure there's Audi RS beamed onto the floor there, but really, that's not enough. In here, it's all right. I'll just pop the ignition on. We've got a flat bottom wheel. We've got zinc paddles. A lot of people call these plastic, but they are cold. We've got the Urus vent slapped on the dash there, which I'm not a big fan of. We've got this sort of carbon fibre effect trim, but surely on a carbon edition, it should look glossy and expensive. This just looks like a wrap. We've got the shift-by-wire shifter, which I don't have a problem with. We've got buttons in this car. Take note. Let's hope these stay in the facelift, because this makes this car stand out from the Octavia, the Golf, and the Leon, and now the M2. So we've got separate climate control here. We've got volume control down here. And yeah, it's all very intuitive. And now, it looks even more old school now than it did 3 years ago when this car came out. There's not an awful lot to say RS. We've got a badge there. We've got a button there. Obviously, the screens are configured to have the RS logo on them here and there. There is a different mode for the instrument cluster if you go into one of the sportier modes, a runway mode, but it's good that you can just have the traditional analog effect dials. I couldn't find out how to do that in the M2. It could be me, it could just be the car. I did have a look in the infotainment system. There didn't seem to be an option under instrument cluster. Right, now let's have a look in the back. So this is in Ed's driving position. He's a pretty normal sized guy. Ed is the boss here at APS, and he's a really, really good guy. So there's little cutouts in the back of the seat for your knees, which is a nice little touch. But it's not too bad in here. We've got some headroom. It's a little bit dark with the dark roof lining, and the windows are actually quite low. I'm 6 foot, so I'm looking at the canter rail here rather than out the window. But it's not bad. As you can see, this is used properly, baby seat in there. Okay, good time to talk about the key then. So it's quite a slim line. It's RS branded, and to open the boot, press that twice. There's no power operation on these. and we have 281 litres with the seats up, but we've got 40, 20, 40 folding facility, so it's super practical. The Sportback is a little bit smaller in the boot than the saloon with the seats up, but obviously with the seats down it's a bit more practical. So this is 281, saloon 310. The M2, it's got a massive boot of 380 litres. Okay, now let's have a quick look under the bonnet, and I think it is actually worth looking under the bonnet on this car, unlike a lot of the EA 888s. So there we have, pretty much unchanged externally, the 5-cylinder, straight 5 turbo engine, 400 horsepower, 500 Newton meters of torque. Nice bit of carbon on there. Of course, we've got a telescopic strut because it's an Audi, not a Golf. Okay, now let's have a look at big boy over there. Okay, there's a lot to talk about with this car, so I'm working off a list. I've been making notes as I've been using the car over the past few days, and there's so many little things you notice. For a start, the door handle feels quality. And then the door card is actually quite nice. So we've got some cheap plastic down here, but it gets a lot better up here. We've got these indentations which look cool. We've got this M logo, which illuminates at night, and if you have the door open in the dark, this actually flashes, which I think is really cool. The switches though look a little cheap, to be perfectly honest, but I can forgive that. Got a nice solid metal door pull there. Stitching a little bit wonky, but yeah, I think it's acceptable at the price point. And then we've got the standard Harman Kardon sound system. Carpets are pretty good. I think I've seen better, but they're definitely better than the ones in the RS3, so that's fine. Stainless pedals, obviously 3 of them in this car. And take a look at these seats then. So part of the £9,000 option pack, the M racetrack package. So they've got some colour on there, and they're carbon backed. They've got this really fiddly pull to get the seat forward, but actually it's very cool the way the electric motor moves the seat forward for you to get in the back, so that's not that impractical. That looks really cool. Is it worth the money? I'd probably say no, to be perfectly honest. And it goes back as well. The standard seats have got colour. If you want them, you can have plain black. You can even have like a tan one as well. What's really cool is that you can actually adjust the angle of the lower cushion without adjusting the base. Instead of lumbar support on this car, we've got adjustable bolsters like on the B7 Audi RS4. Bit of a gimmick that you'll soon get bored of, but actually you don't need the lumbar support because they're very well sorted down there. Now this car is the very car Chris Harris had as his long-term test cars. If you've seen his review of the car that was on the Collecting Cars channel recently, you will know he talked about adjusting his manberries because of this bit of carbon. Now I can't get that image out of my head, and probably you can't now as well. But yeah, it's really kind of weird. When I was reading reviews, they said that if you've got a manual car, your thigh rubs on this every time you press the clutch pedal. But if you're a Volkswagen man, you'd wonder why, because the clutch pedal should be here, but actually it's here, where the brake pedal is on a normal car. And the electric parking brake, by the way, doesn't come on automatically, as I've just noticed. So yeah, when you press the clutch, that's what happens there. I've had some people in the car and they really do not like this at all. So another reason to go for the standard seats. Driving position otherwise though is pretty good. I think it'd be an amazing car with the auto, to be perfectly honest, which is free. So we've got this manual gearbox with this traditional BMW stick that looks like it's come out of the 1990s, but that's not bad. And there's a slab of carbon down here. We've got the iDrive as well as a brilliant touchscreen system. Push button start, exhaust there, M mode there, setup. But really, you won't be touching this. It's all in the screen and it all works wonderful. You can see the way the instrument cluster goes into the infotainment system as one sort of screen. And actually, that works really well. Be careful not to lose things down here, though, because it's quite a lot of space here where I've lost my sunglasses and microphones while I've had the car. Nice carbon. Audi, why can you not do this? So this interior, even though it's not perfect, is actually a lot better than the Audis. Another thing about the pedals, I'm wearing small shoes because I just don't feel safe driving this car with anything bigger, which is a bit tricky this time of year when there's a lot of mud around. Now there's no climate control panel on the dash. We've got some shortcuts here for the demisting, hazards, up and down track, and radio stations, and a volume knob there, which is nice. But most of the infotainment is in here. Unlike a Golf 8, it's illuminated all the time because it's part of the screen. It's not tactile though. The thing about the Golf one is that it's recessed into the dash around here, so you can feel it. This is just part of the screen, but I think it actually works better. So hopefully Golf 8 facelift will have a similar system to this. So you can go up and down the temperature really easily. I'm sure voice control does all this for you as well. And if you want heated seats, they're in here as well. Bit fiddly, really, a couple of presses to get to them when it would just be easier on a switch, but there we go. It's actually a very good user interface, works really well, really fast and really logical. I'm a bit vexed by the instrument cluster though, because whatever I do, I can't find a way of making it have a traditional instrument cluster. It's really hard to read the rev counter and the speedo. Yeah, we get digital speeds, that's good, but the rev counter is hard to read. You know you're between sort of 2 and 2,500 RPM. You don't know exactly where. And I've tried in here a lot. Nice actually having the home button on the right side, which probably for left-hand drivers over here. Skoda didn't do that, and it actually does make a big difference. And then if we go into... I mean, there's all these things here I just don't have time to play with. It's a very short loan of a car I've got no experience with, of a brand I've got very little experience with, but there's a lot to play with here. Right, displays, instrument cluster, and whatever I do, I can't get it to change to normal rev counter. We've got a head-up display as well as standard. Steering wheel's cool, so lots of buttons on here for the cruise control. This doesn't seem to have changed for ages on BMWs, and it's nice bit of carbon. M1 and M2 for your driving modes, so easy to access, and you can configure them in here. There you go, if you press that. So that's a nice touch. And then you can change the contents of the trip computer by pressing the board computer button there, but as I said, I can't really get a normal speedo or rev counter, so maybe it's just me. Heating steering wheel button out of the way down here, so you can't do that in error. Take note. Volkswagen. There are 3 more things I just quickly want to mention. Firstly, that we don't have washer jets built into the bonnet. They're actually in the wiper arm, which is really cool. I think that started with the Bentley Bentayga. If you order the manual gearbox, you still get cruise control, but you don't get adaptive cruise, which is standard with the auto, so something important to consider if you like adaptive cruise. A lot of you guys do. Also, the parking brake isn't that clever. It's a bit like a Porsche one. I think it's actually a bit cleverer than a Porsche one because it will come off when you don't have your seatbelt on. But that's useful for manoeuvring the cars. You should always drive with your seatbelt on. But the bit that bugs me the most is that when you turn the car off, it doesn't come on. When you open the door, it doesn't come on. And being a manual gearbox, we don't have it in park. So quite often you park up, leave it in neutral. The car's actually started to roll away from me a couple of times while I've had it. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye on for sure. Okay, now let's have a look at the space in the back. So it's 2-door only M2. You really do not want to scuff these seats. Is that hitting the sun visor? No, it's okay. And, ooh, bloody hell. Is that the best you can do? Okay, so it's head first then. Not the most graceful way to get into a car. It's quite nice in here though. Door cards look pretty good quality still. Got the indentation there, which looks nice. Oh, I love this. I love this. I love this. I love seatbelts that are just not black. Obviously on the RS3, they're just black. And we've got the third zone of the climate control here, which is nice digital panel. And actually the vents aren't obviously cheaper than they are at the front, which is the case on some cars. Contrast stitching on this storage box. By the way, we've got USB-C there, which worried me. But at the front here, under this slab of carbon, we've got 2 massive cup holders and a proper size USB there as well, which is cool. In here, it's moving back. Actually, knee room's good, and we've got these cutouts here, which you think are maybe something to do with the raciness of the seats, but it could be just for your knees, but I don't need them, so this actually feels more comfortable than the RS3, apart from the roof. So we've got a low roof line being a coupe, and my head is right on it. So yeah, if you're 6 foot like me, might be a problem. Sort of 5'8" or below, and kids, be perfectly fine, though it is a little bit claustrophobic in here. This B-pillar is right in my face, though there is quite a lot of width here, which does help a lot. And actually, yeah, it's not bad, but it's not going to be as practical as an RS3. Though the boot is bigger. Right, how do I get out? So pull this. Right. Yeah, those carbon seats, I think I'm stuck. Oh my God. Okay, we're out. I'm not the biggest person in the world, and that is really tricky, so all this is going to get scuffed. So yeah, maybe think of it as a two-seater. This is the key. It's got the M logo on there, and to open the boot we just press this button for about half a second, and then it pops up like that. And that's the rear view camera there, so not integrated into a badge or anything. It does get dirty quite easily, as you can imagine. So 380 litres, and we've got 40, 20, 40 folding, just like the RS3. It's not always the case with saloon type cars. Warning triangle, and you can close it with that. Okay, now let's have a look under the bonnet. Straight six twin turbo, located from the front axle backwards, which is a big difference over the RS3, which has the 5-cylinder engine pretty much here at the front of the car, which affects the whole balance of the car. Lots of bracing. There's no carbon or anything, it's all black plastic, but it all looks pretty good. So the M2 looks like a more serious performance car, but how do they perform on the road? Well, let's find out, starting with the RS3. Well guys, it's great to be back in an Audi RS3. It's been nearly 2 years since I last drove one. That was Audi's yellow press car, and I drove one a couple of months before that at Tetbury Audi, and actually nearly bought one, but I was moving house and having to wind down my business. I didn't think it was a good time to commit to that much expenditure, but things have moved on now. There's lots of these in the country for sale. Prices are coming down. It could be the time to push the button and have a bit longer behind the wheel than a quick test drive. And another reason why I'm even more tempted to buy one of these is because Racing Line now produce the PCM tuning box, and that's what this car has got fitted under the bonnet. So at standard, it's pretty close to the M2 in performance. It'll actually wipe the floor with it on a standing start, although the M2 is pretty good for just a rear-wheel drive car. Obviously this is four-wheel drive, but now I don't think the M2 will see which way this car went, particularly in conditions like these. It's 2 degrees, the roads are greasy. So instead of 400 horsepower, we've got 451. Instead of 500 newton meters of torque, we've got 600. So if you thought it was disappointing when the RS3 came out and it was just pretty much the same performance as the old one, now you know what to do. So it's quite handy that this car's actually got the carbon ceramic brakes, because with so much extra performance, well, you can't have too much in the way of brakes. Now I put this car, they're wonderful, aren't they? I put this car in dynamic mode. It's a little bit firmer than the M2 in its comfort mode, but in the RS3 in comfort mode, it's a lot more compliant than the M2, as I'll demonstrate later. So it's a little bit skippy and bouncy now, but rest assured, if you select comfort mode, it'll be perfectly composed on these crappy British roads. Now what this extra power and torque has done is that it makes the clever Magna-Torque vectoring rear diff so much more apparent. The back of the car is alive, trying to vector all that torque. It's got a lot more torque, 20% more torque, so I have to vector. And if you loved this car before, you will absolutely be blown away by it. Now, I mean, look at the condition, they are pretty terrible. And I can exploit all that power and torque now. I don't think the M2 can live with this car in the dry, but in these conditions, oh my God. There's a bit more turbo whistle as well now, because the turbo's working that bit harder. Wow. Wow, you certainly need those brakes. I really don't think now there's an awful lot on the road that could be faster than this car point to point, particularly on a day like today. It's on the standard Bridgestone tyres, which are pretty good. They did quite well, I think, in an Evo tyre test. But nothing works really that well apart from all-season tyres or winter tyres at 2 degrees. But we've got a lot of mechanical grip, so it's not all about the tyres. And actually, even in dynamic mode, I can feel the compliance now we've picked the speed up. Let's just talk about the gearbox then. So we've got the DQ 500 7-speed in this car. Obviously the M2 is a manual, so I can't tell you how that performs, but that's got the 8-speed ZF torque converter gearbox, which isn't famous for its quickness of shift, but this isn't a particularly quick S-tronic DSG, and I think they're probably there or thereabouts the same. What's important is that both of them actually have a manual mode, so they don't change up at the rev limiter and they don't kick down too readily, so that just makes it a lot more fun, and you can revel in all that torque, which both of them have got loads and loads of. Wow, I like this car. I liked it before, but for 700 quid you can turn it into something that is frankly ballistic. I'm not using that word out of turn. This car is just phenomenal, and it's 2 degrees. But this might be too easy for some people. They might want a bit more of a challenge. So on that note, let's go and drive the BMW M2. Well, welcome to the G87 BMW M2, and yeah, it's certainly very different in here. It feels like a more expensive car. It feels like a more modern car as well. It feels like a bigger car. Whether that's good or bad is, I guess, up to you. Now, there are a couple of things I want to mention about the RS3 that I've just driven. And first is about the windscreen. That was due to be replaced today, but because I was filming, they've had to put that off. Also, that car did have the Racing Line tuning box on it, but kind of ignore that for the purposes of this review. It's safe to think that both cars have got similar levels of performance, but if you wanted to tune one, I think the RS3 would deal with that a lot better than the M2, primarily because of the traction. Now, I just want to talk about the exhaust sound. We've got a straight 6 twin turbo, some big exhaust, but it doesn't actually seem to be as tuneful as you'd hope, and that's the way modern cars are, so I guess I'm stating the obvious. If you put the car into sport mode, it gets a little bit louder at idle, and Sport Plus again has got a little bit more bass at idle as well. You can hear a valve changing somewhere at the back of the car, but actually when you're driving, it's not that loud, as this sort of footage of me flying by the camera shows. Let's talk about refinement. There are a couple of issues with this car. We've got a lot of tyre, and therefore we have a lot of tyre noise. It's probably not as bad as like a Porsche Cayman GTS or GT4, but it's still probably more than you might expect. Also, because we've only got 6 gears, when you're on the motorway, it's doing just over 2,000 RPM in 6th. At 70 in the 8-speed auto, I reckon it'd be a good couple of hundred RPM lower, which would be more economical and quieter. Let's talk about the gearbox then. So manual sounds like a great recipe, doesn't it? It's twin turbo straight 6, but in reality it's not that great, primarily because of the pedal offset. So I'm having to wear smaller shoes, and I'm hearing my foot rubbing against the dead pedal on the left hand side. Basically, you think you've got a brake pedal in front of you like an auto and a throttle, and then the actual throttle looks like an automatic stead pedal on the right. It's that way far out of alignment. I've not come across that before. I'd love to know if that's the case in the previous generation M2, but it does kind of ruin my enjoyment of this car. Pedals are very important for the control of the car, and to muck around with them like this seems a bit strange. I wonder if it's the same in left-hand drive markets. Do let me know. I know when the journos tested this car in California about a year ago, they didn't talk much about that. Then of course with these seats we've got this carbon bit here that's been well talked about before, that rubs into your thigh when you go for the clutch. I don't think it's enough of a car to keep in your garage for weekends or nice days. You want to use it as a daily, and therefore I think more than usual the automatic is the one to go for. But that's just my opinion. Okay, now let's talk about performance then. So we've got 460 horsepower, 550 newton meters of torque, and as I said, in reality that's a match on paper power to weight for the RS3, but actually on the road it feels quite different. We're trying to propel more weight, and we've got 2 turbos, and the weight performs, it's actually quite different. So it reminds me of a B5 Audi RS4, the way the torque, if you keep it in a high gear, like we're in 4th now at 35, if you mash the throttle, it's actually, there's a bit of lag. What are we at? A couple of thousand RPM. And then about 3,000 it really starts to pick up, and that just takes me back to the B5 RS4. The only difference is we don't have all-wheel drive. We have a little bong on the dash when we go slightly over the speed limit, and sometimes it does get that wrong. When it's reading the gantries on the M25, it can not read the variable sign that picks it up from 50, and it'll bong very annoyingly, but I'm sure that can be turned off. But yeah, I actually haven't got anywhere close to the rev limiter in this car because it's just a bit too hairy in these conditions to do that. I mean, yeah, thinking about it, it doesn't really feel quicker than the RS3, but I just think there's something in the back of your mind about the fact that you've only got drive at the back, and you've seen quite a few BMWs in ditches or on the Nürburgring in the Armco, and you've kind of got that programmed into your head. I don't think that's necessarily a problem when you get to know the car. I've had it for 3 days now, and I'm getting to grips with it a bit more, but there's always going to be a little bit of fear that something will catch you out, like diesel on the road or black ice or something, and then I don't think ESC is going to help. But that's probably true of a lot of cars as well, but I just think this is a little bit edgier and just that little bit likely to catch you out. Now we need to talk about the ride quality, because this is a firm car, and actually one of the things I like least about it is that it's almost like the old Audi suspension team that made all those S-lines rock hard back in the noughties have moved over to BMW, and the guys from BMW that made relatively supple cars are now at Audi. So yeah, this is a firm car. I've played with the modes, and I think having everything in sport and the dampers in comfort is the best configuration. And then the car's just about compliant enough for our broken road network, but Sport Plus, it's pretty bad. But you know, it's designed to work on track. It's got a lot of weight it has to control, and that's the trade-off. But there's nowhere near as comfortable in comfort mode as the RS3, so bear that in mind. But it does become quite addictive, just learning when the tyres will slip, and in this case with the SC fully on, learning when the SC will engage, on the basis that one day you'll be able to drive this car to its fullest, just like someone like Joe Achilles can, who's had like probably 2 decades of putting the power to the back of BMWs. Should also mention that the gearbox has got the auto blip function, which picks the revs up when you're changing down, just like it does on a Cayman GT4, which is really cool. It makes it a lot more fun if you can't heel and toe. I'm not sure if these pedals make it easier or harder to heel and toe. Again, let me know in the comments. Now this car goes back to BMW today. This is actually my last drive, and I just want to see if we can have a bit of fun with the ESC on, if it will kill you or not. Let's just find out. We've got a bit of a greasy exit to this little lay-by. This road's pretty quiet. There's quite a bit of room here, and visibility is excellent. So let's just get the revs up, and we can control the clutch really nice and easy with the manual. So let's go. And that is why this car can be a lot of fun. Full ESC mode on, and you can come out of junctions really safely with a smudge of oversteer. And yet, floor it on this road, be an idiot. And you can feel it weaving a bit, but the electronics are keeping you safe. So that's what's really impressed me with this car. It's not just things like the interior trimming. It's got a sense of fun that is distinctly lacking from a lot of cars. It's clearly a good car, but is it, in my opinion, better than the RS3? Now these cars might be rivals, but they're actually very, very different. Both make use of existing platforms that have been adapted to suit their needs, but that's actually where the similarities end. The RS3 is basically the maximum evolution of the MQB platform, which it shares with the humble Golf, while the M2 is basically a chopped down, detuned M4. Now you could say that's a win straight away for the BMW, because you're effectively getting a car from the class above for the same price as the RS3. However, it's not as simple as that. The RS3 pretty much matches the M2 when it comes to performance, and you can deploy it more of the time thanks to its clever all-wheel drive system, which means you don't have to be a highly skilled driver to get the most out of it. I'd also say its engine is a little bit more charismatic, it's usefully more compact, and it's actually more practical in Sportback guise, which we have here today, and the ride in comfort mode is far more suited to the UK's crumbling road network. However, if you are a highly skilled driver who doesn't mind a hard ride and you relish the challenge of a torquey rear-wheel drive car, then it just has to be the M2, because you'll find the RS3 a little bit inert, particularly if you drive it on track. The other issue with the RS3 is its interior material quality, which is a massive step down on both the previous generation RS3 and this M2. The M2 does a far better job of justifying its hefty price tag because it's much nicer inside. It's got far greater road presence, and there's this ever-present feeling that it's just simply a more serious performance car. Now, even though I'm no driftmeister, but I do like value for money, and it's that would push me towards the M2 over the RS3, and I'd keep the standard seats and the automatic gearbox and save 10 grand in the process, and the standard seats will still be much, much better than those in the RS3. And if it decides to kill me one day and gets written off, well, then maybe the RS3's nasty interior won't look so bad after all. As ever, guys, thanks for watching this Volks Wizard video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting. Big thanks to BMW UK for the loan of the M2, and big thanks to APS Specialist Vehicles here in Brackley for the loan of the RS3. See you for the next one very soon.